I can see Professor Manmohan Agarwal.
Hello, Ragesh. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Manmohan. Very good to see you. I see Professor Parthapatimla, Pal, see Veeramani and Isha all on board. Very good. So let's start. So first of all, welcome to this seminar on intra-industry trade in manufactured goods, a case of India. I think it is a very important theme because, as we know, a large part of the international trade these days is actually presenting intra-industry trade. I mean, and some part of it is intermediate goods trade passing between the countries, and which is so it is very important to look at the patterns, trends, etc., and determinants of the intra-industry trade, and how what kind of insights we get from that to factor in the policy formulation. So today I'm very happy to introduce Professor Manmohan Agarwal, who has written this paper along with probably his student, Dr. Neha Metai, who is at IIM Bangalore. And this is the paper he has done on this theme. And he will, of course, present. And Manmohan is not, someone who needs any introduction for this audience. He has been occupying a very substantial space in the economics discussion, research and discussion and teaching over the past, maybe 3-4 decades, if not more. He has been at JNU for a very long time. Then he has spent some time at the Center for Development Studies and in CG in Canada, and he's now a visiting professor at ISID. So very happy to welcome you, Manmohan, for the seminar. And I see a number of people joining us. I saw just now Professor Goldar, Professor Anand Gupta, so a number of very senior people are on board, which means that this paper has attracted a lot of attention already. So welcome everyone. And I want to also welcome the 3 distinguished panelists for this presentation. And they are also some very well-known names who have worked on this area for a long time, including Professor Partha Pratim Pal, who is a professor at Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, very acknowledged, researcher on this field, and then Professor C. Veeramani, who has been consistently producing papers on the intra-industry trade, and my own colleague Isha Chawla, who has joined us in the last few months after teaching at Delhi University and doing a PhD at the School of Economics. So with that, let me invite Manmohan to make his presentation. Then I will invite one by one the 3 distinct panelists, and then throw it open to the open discussion with everyone. Over to you, Manmohan.
Thank you very much. You have the PPT with you, right?
Sorry?
I had sent the PPT.
Yeah, I suppose, the Dhananjay, do you have the PPT with you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so can you upload it? Hello, Mr. Shankar.
Hello.
Very nice to see you. Professor Gupta. Hello. Hi. So while this presentation is being uploaded, I think immediately after that, Manmohan will be taking us through this presentation.
How long would you like the presentation to be, Nagesh?
I think because there are three panelists, so if you could say, finish it in 30 minutes, that would leave them, 10 minutes each. And then rest of the time we can spend with the open discussion. Is that fine with you?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, good. Hello, Professor Sunanda Sen. Very good to see you. Yeah, go ahead, Manmohan. So,
okay. Next slide, please. Next slide. What we will discuss in this paper is intra-industry trade in manufacturers for India. Now, it was found in the 1960s that classical and neoclassical theories of trade did not explain trade flows. It was found that trade flows were more of the inter-industry type rather than increasing than of inter-industry. So countries were increasingly exchanging products in the same category. Okay. In this paper, we examined the extent of IIT in trade in manufacturers between India and its top 15 trading partners. We divide the manufacturing commodities into 10 categories based on their technological content. And we then look at the factors that determine intra-industry trade. Finally, we look at one particular category called medium technology manufacturers, which has the potential for higher intra-industry trade with significant benefits. Next slide, please. Now, classical and neoclassical theories emphasized intra-industry trade. I think the previous slide, yeah, okay. Under these, each country would specialize in the production and export of a particular commodity, and all the intermediate steps to produce that commodity would be conducted within the country. Comparative advantage sprang from differences in technology, the Ricardian theory, or differences in factor endowments, the Heckscher-Ohlin theory. But it was observed in the 1960s that trade was of goods belonging to the same category, confirming Leontief's observation as early as the 1930s. Initial research on intra-industry trade by Verdun Velasa found an increasing proportion of intra-industry trade than inter-industry trade. Next. But few researchers found evidence of intra-industry trade among developing countries and between developed and developing countries. They speculated that this was either because developing countries' inability to exploit economies of scale and because of significant differences in factor endowments between northern and southern countries. The initial studies on intra-industry trade were largely empirical, with little theoretical backing, which had to wait for the work of Krugman. Krugman showed that intra-industry trade was induced by two factors: production economies of scale and consumers' love of variety. These gave rise to gains from trade from intra-industry trade. He subsequently found that intra-industry trade increases as countries' endowments become similar. Helpman measured similarity as an absolute difference in income between countries and showed the negative correlation between similarity and bilateral intra-industry trade. Next, please. Since Krugman, theoretical and empirical work has tried to determine other factors apart from similarity or income that influence intra-industry trade. Factors such as the size of the economies, regional integration, comparative advantage in production, gravity variables such as distance between the economies were also included. Next, please. Several studies have examined the presence of intra-industry trade between India and its trading partners the distinctiveness of the patterns, and the determining factors. First, trade liberalization is an essential factor in increasing intra-industry trade. Then FTAs and RTAs have enhanced intra-industry trade in India. Agreements with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations have increased intra-industry trade, particularly in agricultural products. Veeramani shows that rising India's exports contributed to the increase of intra-industry trade, and it was found that intra-industry trade in textiles increased because of net exports. Bakshi found that it is the rise in imports that has been responsible for increasing intra-industry trade in the textile industry. A number of researchers have found that India has higher intra-industry trade with developed countries, i.e. dissimilar economies, which would suggest that there is more vertical intra-industry trade in India's trade. Next slide, please. This paper explores the nature of trade between India and its 15 most important trading partners. These are Bangladesh, Belgium, China, Germany, Hong Kong, etc. And they account for over half of India's trade. We seek to identify the factors that drive intra-industry trade in India for the period 1988 to 2015. We disaggregate manufacturers according to the technological content. We use the LAL classification, which classifies products into 10 categories, as noted in the next point. Next slide, please. We calculate intra-industry trade between India and its partner countries using the Grubel-Loyal Index, whose formula is given there, where I represents the industries at the third level from groups 5 to 8 in SITC Division 3, and J is the partner country. The measure is derived by matching the value of exports and imports in each industry and then averaging these measures. The index is an appropriate measure in studies that aim to explain comparative advantage, specialization, and predict patterns of trade. However, the index is downwards biased since it does not adjust for aggregate trade imbalances, which tend to be large, mainly when applied to bilateral flows. Next slide, please. We briefly discuss the evolution of India's trade. India's trade with the world has grown quite rapidly, close to over 10% a year. Over half of India's exports are destined for these 15 trading partners. Similarly, over 40% of India's imports originate in these countries. After the global financial crisis, the share of India's exports to these countries declined, whereas imports from these countries have increased. We find the same pattern in groups 5 to 8 as in the overall trade. However, these countries account for over 60% of total trade in manufactured commodities in recent years. India has trade agreements with either directly or through a more comprehensive group agreement with 5 of them: Bangladesh, Nepal, Singapore, Vietnam, and Malaysia. All agreements were either signed or came into force after 2005. Next slide, please. Previous slide. No, next slide. There should be a slide headed analysis. Anyway, the slide which is apparently missing says that IIT for the products under consideration has increased for all 10 categories since 1990, except for this category HTM E&E. IIT is a dominant form of trade for approximately 7 of them in 2015, compared to just 2 in 1990. The lowest IIT is in LTM textiles and the highest in RBM other, followed by engineering, MTM engineering. Primary products have seen the highest increase in IIT since 1990. We also find that no 2 groups follow the same pattern. They are affected differently by the global financial crisis. As we find, the increase in IIT has not been constant. Interruptions because of the Asian financial crisis and the global financial crisis. For instance, IIT in MTM automotive declined after GFC, while it increased in HTM other. Next slide, please. Average intra-industry trade for India's trade with major partners has increased for groups except MTM Auto. As in India's IIT with the world, the lowest IIT with 15 partner countries is in LTM Textiles, and the highest is in RBM Other. The average proportion of IIT in these 15 countries is much later than India's IIT with the world. The numbers indicate that a large proportion of India's trade with major trading partners can still be categorized as inter-industry rather than intra-industry trade. Next slide, please. We employ the gravity model and model intra-industry trade as a function of distance between the two countries and the size of the two economies. We expect the coefficient of the distance variable to be negative and the size of the two economies to be positive. The absolute difference in per capita income, a measure of dissimilarity, is expected to have a negative coefficient. However, past literature on India indicates that dissimilarity may also be positive. We also include the RCA of India and its partner country in order to see whether IIT is trade creating and enhances efficiency. We expect this to be positive. We include dummy variables for whether India has an FTA with the partner. We use the fixed effects model to capture country-specific factors influencing IIT. Next slide, please. The regression model that we use has our independent variable IIT measured using the Grubel-Lloyd index is a continuous variable bounded between 0 and 1. We employ the fractional probit response model for panel data using QMLE. This estimation technique developed by Papke and Woodbridge has two merits over the traditional OLS regression estimates. First, it does not treat for the dependent variable as missing data when that variable has a value of 0. Second, we can estimate the marginal effects of the independent variables on the dependent variable. So it gives us some sense of which variables affect intra-industry trade more. All variables were checked for stationarity and stationarized before running the regression. Next slide, please. The results of the regression analysis show that income dissimilarity has a positive coefficient, though that coefficient is not significant. The size of the economies does not influence intra-industry trade. The only exception to this is the group MTM process. Also, contrary to theoretical predictions, the distant coefficient is consistently positive and significant for all groups. India's FTAs reveal mixed results on intra-industry trade. The coefficient is significant for 10 of the 10 groups, for 6 of the 10 groups, and the impact is harmful for 2 of them. The partners countries RCA on IIT, where the coefficient is significant, is mainly negative. On the other hand, India's RCA is significant for most countries and it is positive for all except 2. Next slide, please. Some further results. India's intra-industry trade leans more towards vertical than horizontal, as India has higher intra-industry trade with developed countries in all groups other than textile. Higher income countries are more technologically advanced with different demand patterns. Thus, those trade with those countries will be more vertical. I trade the same product group, but products at different production stages. Nevertheless, it is important to remember that the coefficient of difference in income is insignificant. The effect is significant only for one group, indicating that India is the supplier of parts and components to high-income economies in the MTM category. The distance variable is consistently positive and significant across all product categories except one, needing further support to the hypothesis that India's IIT is vertical rather than horizontal. Next slide, please. We now discuss this particular category MTM, because the results in there seem to be very different from that in other categories, because it is proved to be an exception to the other results. This category consists of chemicals and certain plastic products, etc. It also includes a few other products such as railway vehicles, trailers, and steel pipes and tubes. We're not able to understand quite precisely why this category consists of such disparate groups. Our results indicate that India and its partner countries, RCAs, have a positive effect on IIT. Thus, an increase in efficiency by either country increases intra-industry trade in this category. Despite India not having a real comparative advantage in NTM, the RCA values have gradually been increasing from 0.4 in 1988, even reaching a value of 1 in some years. Thus, India has a potential in the sector, and an improvement in efficiency will bring about added benefits, increasing IIT. Next slide, please. The coefficient of India's RCA is significant for 8 of the 10 categories and usually positive. Therefore, increase in India's RCA increases IIT. So it implies that India's intra-industry trade is efficiency enhancing and trade creating rather than trade diverting. This suggests that India should focus on increasing the real competitive advantage in high technology areas, as the marginal effect of RCA is highest in medium and high technology manufacturers. So this is a very positive indication of what can be achieved through IITs. The RCA is negative for 2 labor-intensive products, which are at the lower end of the skill spectrum. So the scope for IIT is basically not in labor-intensive products, but in more skill-intensive products. Wherever significant, it is usually negative, indicate that India lacks either the technological capacity to compete with its partner countries. However, the marginal effects are quite small. So the partner countries' RCA has very little effect on intra-industry trade. But India's RCA has a very significant effect on India's FTA has had a beneficial effect, being only trade diverting for 2 of them. Next slide, please. We now discuss the NTM group somewhat in greater detail. The group is susceptible to changes in the size of the economies. Increase of the size of the partner country reduces IIT, while an increase in India's economy increases IIT. This trend is because of the small share of the sector in India. As partner economies grow, India's sector becomes even smaller relatively. On the other hand, as India is set to grow, the size of the sector becomes more comparable to that of other countries. So, sector needs to be comparable in order to participate in intra-industry trade. This story is further corroborated by the sign and the marginal effect of the similarity variable, which is positive and large. As the economies become similar and more comparable, the IIT is likely to increase between the economies. The relatively small size of the sector also explains why the sector is susceptible to trade diversion. This sector has potential for higher intra-industry trade and gains if India can enhance its efficiency and increase the size of the sector. Next slide, please. So the broad conclusions of our study is that India's IIT in 10 categories of manufacture has increased in recent years and is a dominant form of trade with the world. But India's trade with top 15 countries largely still falls under the category of inter-industry trade rather than intra-industry trade. India has the highest intra-industry trade in resource-based manufacturers, whereas intra-industry trade is the lowest in low technology intensive technologies. India's real comparative advantage plays a significant role in increasing IIT for technical categories. Next slide, please. Also, India's FTAs have been IIT enhancing, contradicting the notion that India has not benefited from FTAs. We find that IIT has increased with FTA partners. Thus, there has been a beneficial effect derived from trade agreements, which is good for having confidence in our trade negotiators that they've been doing a good job. We also find that India's IIT increases in distance because of dominance of India's IIT with developed countries located far away and lower IIT with its developing country neighbors. There exists potential to be exploited in medium technology process-based manufacturers wherever the sector is susceptible to trade diversion. The study, however, does not consider the role of multinationals or FDI in IIT. Multinationals mainly engage in vertical. Well, that's the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manmohan. First of all, for a very detailed analysis of patterns of intra-industry trade. And I think, and also presenting it in a very lucid manner. I think your paper has brought out some very interesting facts. First of all, rising or increasing importance of intra-industry trade in India's trade, the potential of medium technology manufacturing, in intra-industry trade in particular. You're finding that this intra-industry trade is overall efficiency enhancing and trade creating. And then FTAs are also found to be beneficial and trade enhancing, IIT enhancing. And the other finding which you found that IIT increases the distance. Are you not saying that India has not been able to integrate with the value chains in the neighborhood, and that is why it is trading more with the distant countries? So some very interesting conclusions emerge from your analysis, which is very timely, I think, because as you all know, there is constant discussion going on the relevance and timeliness of these FTAs with neighborhood or beyond the neighborhood. So I'm sure the three distinguished panelists will take it up further and bring out some more insights. So let me invite Professor Pratim Pal of IIM Calcutta to take the floor and to address what he would like to share with us. Then I would turn to the other two panelists. Over to you, Pratim.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. It's an excellent paper by Professor Agarwal. And though I was not a direct student of him in JNU, but I was in CSP and he was in ITT. So, but I was there. I mean, it's quite a while back, but I was there in JNU during that time when Professor Agarwal is there in ITT. So thank you, sir, for such an excellent paper. I just wanted to basically not much problem with the econometrics at all, but a couple of conceptual issues that I want to clear from you. That you see, one problem I have is that with the RCA method, when you are essentially talking about value addition in international trade through IIT, RCA is a measure of exposed gross exports, isn't it? So even if my import content goes up and value addition doesn't go up, export value goes up, that will show up as a higher RCA. So because RCA is not taking into account value addition, but the gross exports. So should we take that into account in some way to have some modified version of RCA using value addition rather than taking the gross exports? That's my one concern about the RCA part. We know that we use RCA quite often. That's a standard tool to understand competitiveness. But I guess the 1960s Balasa development of RCA was largely during a period of inter-industry trade rather than value-added trade that we are talking about. So that's one of my concern. Secondly, as I say, an essential great paper, and I want to see more work on this. But I also was wondering that how about all those doing business indicator improvement that India was doing in the last few years? So should we include that as a variable in the explanatory variables? Because that was one objective of this improvement in logistics indexes and improvement in doing business indices. So because our trade cost, our time cost was not getting captured in our analysis. Because if it takes like few days or weeks to clear our consignments from the ports, that was creating a issue in IIT inter-industry trade rather than only the cost, physical cost associated with it. So if you can think of incorporating some of these values in the further future papers, that's second. Third is that for the last quite a few years, this emphasis on Make in India has led to increase in tariff rates in India. And we know that increase in tariff rates can have very differential impact on the inter-industry trade, whereas increase in tariff rates of the final product will act against inter-industry trade. There will be like tariff jumping, foreign direct investment. People will try to make the commodities inside the country, but increase in tariff in certain cases, in the intermediate goods might have a problem. So how is the tariff rate changes, which is essentially focused on Make in India, is helping our inter-industry trade? That is something, whether more countries are coming into India for their intermediate production, or India is becoming a kind of a production hub, which we're seeing these days, indications in mobile phone production, etc., etc. More companies are trying to come to India for their production purposes. One issue which I was wondering whether it can affect or contaminate the results is oil. Because if you look at India's top export item and top import item, both are oil. One is crude, another is refined. And that's kind of a huge volume. So I saw Saudi Arabia and UAE as one of some of the countries that you have in the list. So can potentially oil have an impact? Because we import oil, add value and export. Is there a potential impact on oil on the results of inter-industry trade, and whether it is justified to take out oil, because it is a very different dynamics altogether from this result, and look at non-oil commodities? I'm not sure whether you've included it in this analysis or not. That's all. One small question which you have kind of clarified during your presentation is that in your table 4, you have said that the dissimilarity of the per capita gross domestic product should have a negative expected coefficient. But we were in our theoretical argument again, I mean, when we talk about inter-industry trade, we say that one of the classical results was that dissimilar countries would trade more with each other, and that was challenged with inter-industry trade, and it was shown that very similar countries with very similar endowments tend to trade more with each other. So you have explained that it can go either way, but in that case, it should, I think, change it in the table 4. It is shown as negative. You can say that it is kind of mixed, as you have pointed out in your presentation. So these are some of my observations, some of my clarificatory questions as well. But thanks a lot, sir. Thank you and your co-author for such a nice paper. And I was really interested to find out the result on FTAs. Because I kind of tend to have a feeling that FTAs were not helping India much, because the imports have been much higher than what we have managed to export. But it is possible that we are exporting somewhere else using the imported inputs from the FTAs. So thank you for the results.
Thank you, Partha, for very interesting, insightful comments. I'm sure Professor Agarwal will respond to them. I think his colleague, co-author, has already responded to one, that oil is already excluded. Which is a point which was hitting my mind as well, because such a large proportion of our trade is import and export of oil, crude versus refined. And so it is definitely distorting the trade patterns, and analysis such as this should take into account, but it is apparently already taken care of. I think your point about the logistics costs, etc., how they affect is quite well taken. I'm sure Manmohan will respond to that. So let me, thank you for your points and turn to the next panelist, that is Professor Veeramani. And you have, Manmohan, already cited a number of Veeramani's papers. So he is over to you, Veeramani.
Thank you, Dr. Nagesh Kumar, and thank you, Professor Manmohan Agarwal. So this is a interesting paper which shows some really good pattern, the latest trends in intra-industry trade. This topic is very close to my heart. This is the area where I did my PhD, and so which was submitted in 2002. And I am very happy that interest on this topic is still continuing, and for a good reason, because this is not something where we should stop working on. There are a lot of issues which need to be looked at related to intra-industry trade. So that way it is a welcome paper. And let me now look at make some few observations. So first of all, during my PhD, when I did it, the real motivation for working on this topic at that time was because of trade liberalization. So India initiated trade liberalization in 1991, and it was expected that it would lead to a particular type of resource allocation as a result of trade liberalization. So the general understanding is that trade liberalization would lead to resource reallocation towards sectors where India has a comparative advantage. That would mean that inter-industry trade will expand, and therefore some industries will collapse, other industries will come up. So that was the kind of, based on Hexter-Ohlin type of model, that is what is expected. But there are evidence from other countries which shows that that is not what has happened. There is no demise of domestic industries, because there is expansion of both exports and the imports happening simultaneously within industries. And in the Indian context, we have seen similar type of evidence that no manufacturing industries actually gone out of business. On the other hand, exports and imports both simultaneously increased within manufacturing. So that shows there is intra-industry specialization. And now we can see from this paper that this kind of specialization is growing. It is not stopped. It is growing. And that is actually a good thing. Now, from a policy point of view, why should we care about intra-industry trade? So we care about intra-industry trade because it has certain welfare implications. The trade pattern has certain welfare implications because when resource reallocation takes place in response to trade liberalization, if it is intra-industry type resource reallocation, that means if resources are reallocated within industries as opposed to between industries, the adjustment cost associated with intra-industry resource reallocation is relatively lower. So labor suffer less because they do not have to move from one industry to completely different industries. They have to just reallocate within industries. That is relatively less problematic with the less adjustment cost. It is from that point of view, it has a direct welfare and policy implication also. Now, so that is the motivation, and to look at this issue. And then now coming to some conceptual issues about the models, theoretical models of intra-industry trade. I think there is little bit of clarity that is needed in this paper about that aspect, because there is kind of tendency, not only in this paper, also in some other discussions, to kind of mix up ideas here. So let me take some time to clarify this. One is that there is this horizontal intra-industry trade model, which is developed by Krugman, which focuses on exchange of commodities which are differentiated in terms of attributes, excluding quality. The quality of varieties do not come into the picture in this model. In those models, commodities are getting exchanged because countries specialize in unique varieties to exploit economies of scale, and there is taste for variety. So this is happening essentially because of taste for differentiated consumer goods. So intermediate goods doesn't come into the picture at all in horizontal models developed by Krugman. It is just final consumer goods, and they are differentiated, and therefore taste for variety arises, and that is leading to intra-industry trade. And this is the model which is the most important to explain intra-industry trade among the developed countries. Then secondly, there is vertical intra-industry trade. This is this is not very different from the Hexter-Ohlin type of explanations. because here intra-industry trade occurs because of specialization in differentiated varieties, but they are differentiated in terms of quality. Because they are differentiated in terms of quality, again, these are exchange of final consumer products, not intermediate goods. They are final consumer goods, and they are differentiated in terms of quality. And that differentiation in terms of quality is arising because countries have different endowments. A capital abundant country specializes in high quality products. Labor abundant country specializes in low quality products, and then they exchange. That is leading to differentiated goods, which are quality differentiated goods being exchanged. That is the second group of model. Third one is the one which talks about intra-industry trade in intermediate inputs, which is the one proposed by Wilfred Ethier in 1982 paper that focuses on differentiated intermediate goods. And again, that is not a model of GVC. That is, people always think about intra-industry trade as GVC models, but that is, none of these models are actually GVC models, because GVC model means that you have to specializes in different stages of the production process within an industry. And there, the model which are related to fragmentation models are more important. Fragmentation model implies again that a country specializes in different fragments of the production process. So that is the kind of model which is more relevant to understand GVCs within the context of intra-industry trade. And this differentiation is very important, I think, while relating some of the findings to GVC type of trade relationship, global value chain kind of trade relationship. Now, another issue is related to the empirical part, is that when you measure intra-industry trade, the concept of what constitutes an industry is very, very important. Because depending upon our definition of industry, we can get a different values of intra-industry trade. If you consider 2-digit level industry as an industry, you will get very high intra-industry trade. If you consider 8-digit level as an industry, you will get very low intra-industry trade because commodities get separated out. Now, in this paper, what I understand is that they use 3-digit level of SITC as an industry. Now, that 3-digit may not be the right kind of aggregation that one may think about using. It may be a little aggregated, so that what happens is that relatively different products get clubbed together within a 2-digit product category, within a 3-digit category, so that you may end up getting relatively high IIT. So I would suggest that since we have data up to 8-digit level, going to a 4-digit or a 6-digit of HS harmonized system may give a better definition of what constitutes an industry, which will give you not too high level of intra-industry trade, at the same time not too low level. Because at the 4-digit or 6-digit level, you may group commodities which broadly corresponds to what we generally understand as an industry. Otherwise, there can be biases that may be created. So that is one suggestion related to the measurement. And we have data based on HS classification starting from 1988 onwards. So there is no issue with respect to data. At least one can try to see how the measurement that you are getting is sensitive to the level of aggregation, which is very important in an intra-industry study. And another thing about the regression analysis is that you do this regression separately for each technology categories. That is a very interesting way of doing these things. But I would suggest that it may be a good idea, not just, and the regression focuses just on country characteristics, because it's a gravity model. You focuses on country-specific characteristics like income level of countries, per capita income, their similarity, and regional trade agreement, etc. But in addition to country-specific characteristics, industry-specific characteristics are also very important in explaining intra-industry trade, like the extent of product differentiation, which is possible in an industry, or multinational involvement in an industry, economies of scale, the possibilities for economies of scale. So this type of industry-specific and also trade barriers, like tariff rates or non-tariff barriers, all these industry-specific characteristics are also important. So I would suggest that it would be a good idea, instead of separately running regressions, to pool all the 4-digit or 3-digit industries together across partners, and then run a regression which has both country characteristics, which you have already included, as well as some industry characteristics. Now, to understand the differential impact for each technology category, it is still possible within that regression, because you can create a dummy variable for each of the technology categories and interact that dummy variable technology technology category dummy variable with the explanatory variable to find out whether these explanatory factors are different for each one of the technology categories. One can do that kind of interaction effect. To do that, I think that will give a much richer picture, with richer findings in terms of both industry characteristics and country characteristics. Another thing is that which I would suggest is that it may be a good idea to see if you do that type of pooled regression, it is possible that the kind of intra-industry trade that India is having with advanced countries, with developed countries, as compared to developing countries, may be very different for different technology characteristics, the commodities under different technology characteristics. It is possible that India may have in high technology products, India may have a more trade with say countries with similar level of income, and in low technology products, India may have more trade with high income countries, because if the intra-industry trade is mostly vertical in nature, that is what the studies suggest, your results suggest, that it is more vertical in nature, because you are trading more with the countries which are far, the distance, as distance increases, intra-industry trade is increasing. That is one of your finding. And another finding is that as the income level of the partner countries increases, intra-industry trade is increasing. That means that intra-industry trade is mainly vertical in nature, not horizontal, which is expected. And this is the same finding which I got earlier. So, but therefore, I think interacting country characteristics with the product characteristics will be a good idea to see whether there can be any specific results with respect to each product category interacted with the country characteristics, so their income levels, etc. And finally, about the result that you are reporting about free trade agreements. It is nice to know that free trade agreements are increasing intra-industry trade, but in terms of interpreting its implications in terms of welfare, I think one need to be a little bit careful, because this does not necessarily mean trade creation. Because you are interpreting this as trade creation, it can very well mean, under the present framework, the regression framework that you have used, it can very well mean trade diversion. Because what can happen is that, suppose that before the free trade agreement, if India was exporting to some partner a particular product and importing from another partner, now after signing the free trade agreement, you divert that trade and you export and import with the same partner with which you have signed agreement. So you are diverting away with the non-partners. So now you are exporting and importing with the same partner with which you have now signed the agreement. Then that would mean trade diversion. And the trade diversion is not welfare improving. We know that. So unless we differentiate that, whether rule out trade diversion, interpreting this positive result that we are getting as good may not be appropriate. So I think the gravity model framework need to be modified to eliminate the possibility that there are no trade diversion taking place, and these positive effects are not because of trade diversion. They represents genuine trade creation. Then only we can say that it's a positive impact. And just the last one point is that it is clarified that oil is not included in the data. But then another interesting important category which you can consider excluding from this entire analysis is gems and jewelry. Because gems and jewelry is a category where we have a very large import as well as a very large export, and which can completely kind of change the result because it is not like a typical intra-industry trade of the kind that we learn from textbook. It is just importing unpolished diamonds, polishing and exporting. Not the usual typical type of intra-industry trade, but your measure can be highly influenced because of very high trade value in gems and jewelry. So one may try to remove that and then re-estimate to see whether that makes a big difference. Yeah, so that's what I have. I stop it here. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Veeramani. I think you have added a lot of insights to this analysis which has been done, especially because you have been consistently working in this area, and so it was very much expected. Incidentally, I forgot to mention that Professor Veeramani is on the faculty of Indra Gandhi Institute for Development Research in Mumbai. I think soon after your PhD, you joined this and stayed there. Is that correct?
No, I was in ICRIER for 2 years.
Oh,
then
okay.
IIT also, IIT Bombay.
Yeah.
So that
And I think a number of very important points he has brought out. Firstly, about a nuanced discussion about different types of intra-industry trade, and how they are different from GVC trade. That is, I think, very interesting. Nuance that you have brought out. Then your point about that 3-digit level may be too aggregated for this analysis, and for intra-industry trade, one needs to really go deeper at a much more detailed kind of analysis, which would be 4 to 6-digit level. And trade data, fortunately, is very well disaggregated one is very well available. So why not we try doing that? And then your suggestion about pooling or industry and bringing in the industry characteristics, etc., would be also very helpful, bring out insights. And your point about FTAs, that what we are taking as a trade creation may actually be trade diversion from non-FTA partners to FTA partners. So that, maybe, so, and then gems and jewelry like, petroleum and oil products could be just a reprocessing and re-export kind of a trade. So better to keep it out. I think, thank you. I must thank you for bringing all of these nuanced and insightful points, which I'm sure both the authors would have benefited from, and they will respond at the end. So before I go to the open discussion and responses by the authors, let me turn to our third panelist, Dr. Isha Chawla, who is currently on our own faculty at IIT. So Isha, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. There is so much to learn from all of you distinguished professors. I am new to the intra-industry literature, trade literature, but I have few points related to what I have been recently reading. I have been recently reading on the global value chains literature, but I find that there are some aspects which can help you, maybe given the questions which Professor Pal has put forward also. The first one relates to the revealed comparative advantage. So I find that OECD and ADB both mention that this is a more accurate form of looking at comparative advantage in an inter-industry framework. where mainly where it is exclusively goods in where there is trade in finished goods. However, ADB has brought out a new measure of revealed comparative advantage, which is based on domestic value-added flows that are absorbed abroad. So that is known as the new revealed comparative advantage index. However, the problem is that this is available only at the 2-digit industry level. So if you want to supplement your analysis using this new revealed comparative advantage index, then maybe that will help in overcoming the problem with the conventional revealed comparative advantage index. Also, if you look at a comparison between the traditional and the new revealed comparative advantage, there are differences. For instance, in some of the industries which I find, the two indices are stable. However, in some there is a reordering, and it may help in identifying some hidden portions of specialization in case you intend to further use this. For instance, in wood, the new revealed comparative advantage indicator is more than the traditional, and vice versa in textiles, rubber and plastic. And these are some of the industries which you have used in your analysis. Then another point which comes to mind is that if it is possible, maybe because some of the suggestions which I'm giving are for some further work or some robustness checks which may be possible, if you could adopt an alternative classification, because right now you have a classification which is based on technology. If there is an alternative classification of the products, because you already have the product level data. So this would be, for instance, intermediate consumption goods, final consumption goods, and mixed use goods. So this is a classification by Timmer, and this may give some insights which can be useful for trade policy. And coming to trade policy, what is my concern is that though your paper is definitely giving insights about free trade agreement, however, there are aspects of trade policy which still depend on tariff and non-tariff barriers. And here the concerns are not just at the country level or at the industry level, rather they are at the firm level. Because when we look at the trade policy, then trade policy is going to be concerned with also, apart from tariffs and non-tariff barriers, it is also going to be concerned with the production standards, environmental protection, flexibility of commitments, investment protection, and dispute settlement mechanism. So depending on what kind of firm it is, whether it is a domestic firm, whether it is an autonomous exporter which is not in the formal contracts, or it is a GVC firm, or it is a multinational firm which is entirely into the GVCs. So it is going to give us different insights because they will have multi-dimensional trade preferences. So this cannot be incorporated at the industry level. So if there is some way in which you can align the product level trade data with the industry data, which Veeramani sir has suggested, with some firm data, at least for 1 year, if you can even show the distribution of these 4 categories of firms in a particular industry, it may give some insights regarding trade policy. Because this is especially important in the context of intra-industry trade, because in intra-industry trade there will be some firms which are going to oppose import liberalization, import tariffs, and there are going to be some which are going to export. So there is a huge diversity of firms within the particular industry, firms which are engaged in IIT. Then my next submission is that if it is possible for you to look at the ADB database, because here you will be able to get the value added exports, because the concern which Professor Pal had mentioned in the beginning, that if you look at gross exports, now if we look at gross exports, then the problem would be, for instance, in, let us say, other manufacturing, now 34.6% foreign value added. Coke and petroleum, 59% foreign value added. So maybe some of the, not all the industries you would have taken into account for your work, but the foreign value added content is very high. So there is a Borin and Mancini decomposition of exports. ADB is providing the data so that the foreign value added can be removed, pure domestic counting can be removed, and we are left with the domestic value added, which is getting directly absorbed abroad, either by the partner country directly or it is re-exporting it. But again, the trade data is there, but again, the drawback is that it is at the 2-digit manufacturing level. Then when I was looking, because I wanted to suggest something which is doable also in terms of the indicators which you have used. So I found one OECD study which is mentioning intra-industry trade in intermediates. So it suggests that it is possible to work out the global loyal index using the TIVA database, because they are giving you information on intra-industry trade indices in intermediates. Now they say that it is a proxy for the countries' insertion in GVCs, but I have read the literature that IIT and GVCs are not having a very strong correlation with each other. But at least if it comes to the intermediate trade, then you may consider this database for working out the intra-industry trade in the intermediates. Then one more aspect is that if you look at these databases, then it may help you, because these are at the sectoral level. For instance, 35 sectors in ADB database. So maybe you could consider intra-industry trade for manufacturing and services both, because services sector is also becoming important now. And then you are doing the work at the 2-digit level, maybe the work gets simplified to that extent, and it may help you as a parallel exercise to the detailed product level work that you have. It may just help you over there. And then one very small concern which I just read somewhere was that since the trade data is subject to fluctuations, maybe you could use 4-year window, 2-year window, 6-year window. This is just one aspect which came while I was reading. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you, Isha, for adding some more points for the consideration of the authors. So you have highlighted how ADB has come up with a new measure of RCA, which can possibly take care of the problems with conventional measure. And so, but the limitation is that it is available at 2-digit level, but possibly that new formula can be replicated at more disaggregated level.
And so just one more point, one which was in my mind, that since the data is available for all the 25 regional economies, so it may help to study intra-industry trade at the regional level. This database may help.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So, and then you suggesting that besides technology-based classification, which the authors have used, possibly other, use-based classification like intermediate, final routes, or something like that can be used. And then the trade policy implications, how the environmental protection and other, issues affect these results. And then, what was your other point? The fluctuations are there year to year, so you could possibly average out over a few years and all that. So very interesting, thoughtful suggestions. And so I want to now turn to the our participants and see if they want to have any questions or clarifications from the authors before I give the floor to Manmohan once again. So anyone who wants to go, I see a number of very senior people are in the audience. So anyone? Professor Gupta, Professor Sunanda Sen, Professor Goldar, all very distinguished. So please raise your hands, and of course, younger colleagues, younger researchers who are also participating. Anyone, please feel free. Yeah, so I see a hand raised by Sagnik Bagchi. So go ahead, please. Sagnik Bagchi, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, sir. It's a wonderful opportunity to listen to such kind of talks. Thanks to ISID for organizing all this and letting us to listen. Now, sir, I have two simple queries. One is that since it is a sectoral level study, I find the computation of intra-industry trade could have been better with the Acuno's 1978 measure, because it controls for the sectoral imbalances in trade than the standard global Lloyd index. This is one thing which I observed. And also, since many of our we have known that this fractional response model that you have used is a new model. And of course, it has better technicalities while dealing with fractional responses regression. But at the same time, the results would have been much more comparable if the Tobit estimates could also have been reported. And alongside this fractional response model are better when they are bootstrapped. So this bootstrap iteration, if it was known to us, then also it would have added some values. Yeah, that's all from my side. And thank you.
Thank you, Sagni. Now, Professor Golda has raised his hand. So over to you, Professor Golda.
Thank you very much. I will be very brief. What I wanted to say is that is part of the trade, international trade is actually intra-firm trade. And to the extent that it is intra-firm trade, the decisions are being taken by the management. And so it would be useful to have a variable which reflects the cross-country FDI flows. In the gravity model, if India's trade with Korea is a variable, then how much is the India's FDI into Korea and how much is the Korean FDI into India could be tried as an explanatory variable. That is what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point, Professor Golda. I think the intra-firm trade is becoming very important, and so FDI could be a useful explanatory variable. So, any other points from anyone? If none, then I would like to invite Professor Agarwal to respond to them. Respond to the points made by the three panelists and our, the participants who raised some questions. Over to you, Manmohan.
Thank you, Nagesh. I see that my co-author, Neha, has joined us. I would just like to ask her if she would like to respond to any of the questions.
Yeah,
no,
she was already
no, Professor, you can go ahead.
Yes,
Okay.
Go ahead, please. Neha.
Thank you, Neha.
No, Professor, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
You see, first of all, the ADB data set at the 2-digit level. You see, for that, we would need input-output tables at that level of aggregation. I don't know whether such input-output tables would be available. Okay. We just have very aggregate level input-output tables available from the VOT data set, which has 11 manufacturing sectors at a very aggregate level. So it would be very problematic to try to do that. Okay. Classification into consumer goods, intermediate goods, and so on. A lot of these commodity classifications are very difficult to make because the same commodity can be both a consumer good and an intermediate good. Again, unless you have a very fine division of data, you will not be able to do it. Okay. Then on trade policy, barriers and non-barrier at the firm level. I wouldn't even know how to go about getting the data for that. I know that a former student of mine is trying to do something on barriers to trade at a very aggregate level, and she's looking through all the WTO notifications. There are 40,000 notifications, and it is taking her 6 months to go through them. So, though it's a very good suggestion, perhaps I think one has to be realistic as to what can be accomplished. There are lots of questions that one would like answers to, but it's not possible to get answers to them. Okay? For instance, Professor Goldar mentioned FDI flows. FDI flows between countries is almost impossible to get. I tried once, and I even contacted UNCTAD, who write the World Investment Report, and they could not provide me with the data. So again, it's a very problematic area. I would like to thank Viramani for his many suggestions. We will have to think carefully about many of his suggestions to see how we could implement them, if at all. Now, if India has a comparative advantage with the world, then if the trade in that commodity expands, that cannot be trade diversion. I find that very positive. Just on a brief note, that whether trade diversion, while it is very clear that trade creation can be welfare enhancing, whether trade diversion is welfare decreasing is much more problematic. One can refer to the textbook by Jagdish Bhagwati, Srinivasan, and Panagaria for that. Okay. Now, the question about the RCA is exports and import are part of value added, and whether one should do it in value added. As I said, it's very difficult to get value added data. So to look at trade flows in value added is not an easy job to do. Secondly, when people buy a commodity in the market, they buy in terms of the final price. They don't see where the value added is. So trade flows actually take place on the basis of final prices, not on the basis of value added. So though it is very nice to do value added in terms of what is going to the domestic economy, but it does not answer what trade flows are taking place. Then there is a question about we should have taken account of improvement in business logistics as an index. As you know, the World Bank itself has given up on that index and said that that index is not very good. Okay. Then it has mentioned the Make in India program of the government. Our data is from 1988 to 2015. Neither Make in India or the recent increases in tariffs of the government took place in that period. So again, it is irrelevant to our analysis. So that's all I have to say in response to the comments.
Thank you, Manmohan. I think you are right that, of course, we want to try a number of things. And of course, on any phenomena, any variable, there are many factors influencing it. But how much is really realistic given the data to do that? So obviously, one is constrained by the availability of data at particular level of disaggregation and quality of data and all that. So one has to be realistic. But I must say that it's a very important detailed piece of analysis on something of great contemporary relevance. So it adds to our understanding on a very important theme, which is intra-industry trade. And of course, much more work can be done as one goes along, but this is definitely an important contribution. And I'm sure, some of the suggestions could be kept in mind for future work when more detailed analysis or data becomes available. But I think it represents a significant piece of work. So for that, I want to congratulate you, Manmohan, and your co-author. And
I would actually like to add a point, if that's okay.
Sure, please, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, so it was also suggested, like Professor Agarwal already mentioned, that indicators like doing business, they're very aggregate level. So they measure India's, ease of doing business with the world. They're not country specific. We feel like by including country fixed effects, if there are any provisions that allow for ease of transport between countries, we've accounted for that. So including an index like that in the analysis would not help in this case. So one thing that we could do is we could probably include time fixed effects as well. So, if there are factors like any crises that have happened in 2008 or anything after that, that could probably be captured by time fixed effects.
Thank you, Neha. Yeah, so this was the purpose of this discussion, that bring out some of the factors which could be possibly captured depending upon the availability of data. And so you have taken on board some suggestions. That's the purpose of doing this exercise. But so I want to really thank both of you for the good paper and good presentation. And I'm sure all of us have been enriched by this discussion, by your presentation, and the discussion by the three panelists and all members of the audience. So thank you very much. Yeah, Manmohan, you want to say something?
I would just like to thank ISID for inviting us to present this paper, and to all the commentators for their comments, and for all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you very much, and we will continue with this series of discussions, insightful research-based discussions, and we will remain engaged with all of you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.